Hi, this is LS540, and today we're going to talk about diversity issues. First, let me say that I wouldn't say surprised, because I always expect the best from you. But your papers, your H1, your scan paper on diversity issues, all of the papers were great. For this lecture, I was thinking about getting some literature, academic literature, written in journals. However, after reading your scan, I think it would be much better to use the examples that you explore in your communities. There were many things that I have never thought about. So I think in this case, and in many cases in my classes, I learn so much from my students, and this is one example of that experience. And this is what I think it makes me love my profession as a teacher, because believe me, when we teach, at least in my case, I sometimes get you get too repetitive. So every semester you tend to say the same things. So what I always try to do is, and this is my teaching approach and my learning approach, is that you and me, in every class, we try to do constructive learning. And constructive learning, or constructive teaching, I guess, it means that learning, information, and knowledge happens as a product of the interaction between the professor and the students. And it's an experience that both actors, in this case, the students as a group and the professor, we learn from each other. Okay, and we learn from ourselves too, because I read your papers and I go over them and sleep over and think about issues of diversity in this case, and I learn from the information that I gather from you. But also that becomes knowledge when I acquire that information and share that information with my own experience and my own thoughts and my own feelings. So I would like to, before we start seeing the issues here, I would like to congratulate you all because of what you have done. And for me, it was a discovery. This is and I'm thinking that in the future, and maybe some of you would like to work on that, we can even try to do a research project on diversity issues and services and collections in libraries. And this would be like an exploratory thing, of course. But if you are interested in doing that research, please make sure you contact me, and we can do something about it, because I think it is very interesting, especially because. And this is what I realized after reading your scans. There are many issues, even in small towns like my town, for example, here in Clergan, that we don't think are present. We always think, when we think about diversity, we think about large cities with a lot of diverse population. And what I'm trying to do in this class is to make sure that we understand that we are all humans. In this case, we are part of that diversity. Okay, there are some dominant groups and there are minority groups. However, we are part of the diversity, because we are not all equal, or so we are different. Of course, there is in our humanity there is a sameness. There is something that we share, but there are some unique characteristics in terms of culture and how we behave. The other thing that I discovered reading your papers is that in some of your areas and in some of your communities, groups that we may think about minorities have become majorities, have become a majority, and they are driving the agenda in libraries, in public libraries, which I never thought about that. And in my opinion, if we're talking about public libraries, the idea of a public library is to serve the whole community. It's to serve every group in the community, every individual in the community. Remember always what I talk about with our active users, those who participate in library services and they go to the library, they visit the library, they go to reference, etc., and the potential users. And the potential users are those who are in the community, but they haven't taken a active role in the library. So again, I'm very I learned so much about your scans, and I think it is a great experience. Please, if you have the time, read each other's paper too, because I think we can all learn from each other. One of the main issues, of course, that I was able to observe in your scans was ethnicity. And that has to do with your cultural background, your heritage, and your language. But we have to make it, at least I believe we have to make a difference here. There are many ethnicities, so we have to make a distinction. For example, and I'm going to use my own example, my own life, because that's the one that I know more. So I am a Latino from Venezuela. That's my, so I have my cultural background is, you can say, well, he's a Latino. But not all Latinos are created equal. There is diversity among us, okay? So, and I think it's the same for every other ethnicity. We Latinos, of course, we share, we either speak Spanish or Portuguese in Brazil, which is a really large country in South America, and the other countries that surround Brazil, we speak Spanish. However, we are different. We have different, even though we share the language, we have different customs, we have different traditions, we differently. I remember sometimes, and this happens to me many times, and I don't get upset or anything. It's just an experience that I like to tell. That many people ask me if if I like spicy food, for example. Well, I don't eat spicy food because in my ethnicity, my cultural background, in the way we make we make food, we don't use spicy jalapeno peppers or anything like that. So we try, and this is human. It has nothing to do with being in the U.S. or being in Europe no. We always try to generalize because it's easier for us to understand diversity. However, we have to be very careful about diversity within diversity, and especially in terms of our services and our collections too. There are if I go to a public library, probably in LA, in Los Angeles, I will find a lot of books in Spanish, for example. But maybe the literature that I find there in Spanish, the Latino literature, it has more to do with the Mexican and the Mexican-American experience and the Chicano experience, for example. And that does not relate to me directly because I'm like a first generation immigrant here. I'm the first immigrant in my family, and I don't have connections with for example, with the Chicano experience in California, or the Californios, as how they were called in the past. Or I don't have any connection with the Mexican American culture, or even with the Mexican culture. So it is interesting that there is a diversity within diversity, and that affects the programs and the collections that we can offer in our public library. Language, it's another interesting variable, and let me explain what it sometimes happens to my children. I have two children, one boy and one girl, and they speak, of course, English better than my language, which is Spanish. Why? Because they grew up here. So in our house, my wife and I, we like to speak Spanish because it's easier for us. However, for them, it's hard, especially for my little girl who is 10 years old. It's hard for her to understand very well what we are trying to say. My son, who is 14, he speaks a little bit better Spanish, but he cannot write or read because I think that was our mistake. We never taught him how to read or write Spanish. But he's taking Spanish classes in his high school, and his teacher, I don't know where she is from. I don't know if she's an immigrant too, or if she's a Latino American or Spanish American, or if she learned her Spanish here in the U.S. I actually don't know, or in Spain. So they have many words. They use many Spanish words that I know they are in Spanish that they teach the kids in the class. However, sometimes when my son asks me if I know the meaning or how to use a word or what's the meaning of the word, I sometimes don't know. I even have to look in the dictionary because there is diversity within within the language. And sometimes I have told my kid, this is the way you say this sentence, and he goes to class and the teacher tells him that it is wrong. And that, of course, the same thing happens in every language. Because culture, and this is from my sociological point of view, and I'm sure there are some sociologists and anthropologists in this class, culture is changing all the time. It's dynamic, and language is also dynamic. Okay, so in my opinion, and this is my opinion, you may have yours, and please post your opinion in the discussion board. In my opinion, there is not one Spanish language, or there is not one English language. Okay. Again, I'm going to talk about Spanish because I know Spanish better than English. So, but the same thing may happen also with the English language. In Spanish, we have Cervantes. It's like your Shakespeare. Cervantes, the greatest Spanish writer. However, if you read Cervantes in the original Cervantes, you will have to read it with a dictionary, because the words he uses and even the grammar he uses is not in use anymore. So there are many things that you don't understand, and you have to always have a dictionary so you can understand what he is referring to, because he wrote 400 or 500 years ago. Why? And why is that? It's because it's not that his Spanish is the correct Spanish. It's that Spanish is a dynamic product of culture. Language is a dynamic product of culture that changes every day and every time. So that's something that we have to take into consideration. For example, when we do collection management. Okay, we may think that we may have the Spanish classics. We may buy Cervantes, Don Quixote, and all other and his work that he did in theater. But that classic, which I believe we should have, it will be not enough for today's Spanish-speaking people here in the U.S. Because they will not be able to understand what Cervantes was saying 400 or 500 years ago. So language is changing, and we acquire new words, new meanings, new constructions, etc. The same thing happens with English or French or Chinese, etc., etc. And then there is geographic differences. Okay, so it's not only there are not diversity in language within time, but also within geographic. Also difference in depending on your geographic background. Being in a country or being in an area within the same country. So diversity becomes a very complex issue. Ethnicity becomes very complex too. Defining what ethnicity is very complex. I think what we have to be careful, and this is my opinion, is that we cannot generalize. We cannot label or stereotype a group. Not all Latinos are the same. Not all Asians are the same. There is a diversity within diversity. And I think we have to take that into consideration when we think about library services and library collections and ethnicity. Okay? I hope that I have made my opinion clear. You may disagree with me. You may have a different opinion, and that is fine. I would like to hear your opinion to learn more from what you have to say. Okay, that's the whole idea. Another issue that also affects library services and collection is social economic status. Okay, and why? Because different social classes have different information problems that have to be addressed by the public library. Okay, a businessman probably does not have the same information issues or questions or problems that a homeless person will have. And in the library, we have to have the resources to offer a great service to the businessman, but we also have to have offer a great service to the homeless person or man or family. So social economic status will mean that we have to have different collections or many collections and many services to different type of people, depending on what? Depending on our community. Remember, we have to study the community to understand who are the potential users, the active and the potential users of our library. Okay, and then we have to tailor-made our services for the community. And remember, we cannot forget who our active users are, but the idea from any point of view is to get our potential users to become active users. Okay. There are many issues. I read many issues in your essays about homeless and the use and how they use the library. Many of them, of course, like to browse in the internet or read emails or try to search for a job, and that's fine. Some may check out books and other reading materials, such as magazines, newspapers, etc. But others, they just use the library as a shelter. And that, of course, becomes a problem or becomes an issue for the public library. And many libraries deal with this issue differently. Many libraries, if they have lots of space, well, they just don't care. You know, you can stay the whole day inside of the library. Other libraries which has less resources would care having, few people hanging inside of the library without doing anything. Well, we have to be very careful about this issue. And in most cases, the library will have a policy. For example, a policy on internet usage or terminal usage. And that policy will state how long can you be sitting in a computer terminal, use browsing or whatever you want to do, because there may be other people who are waiting in line to use the computer too. Just it's the same thing when you have a circulation material. Books, DVDs, games, etc. will have a set time in which they can be in the hands of the patron, of the client, of the user. So social economic status is another variable that will affect library services and collections. Okay. Another very important that I think is related to social economic status and also to immigration is the digital divide. And the digital divide is it's the division between those who have access and know how to use a computer and how to browse the internet and search for information, and those who don't have any opportunity or don't know how to use a computer. Okay, so there is a digital divide there. That also affects library services, because if we have in our community people because of age, and I didn't get that there, but because of age or level of education or social economic status that don't know how to use computers, how to surf the internet, how to search for information, how to use the OPAC, then the library has to provide the resources and the services and the programs to teach these users how to use these resources. And that's very important, to have library instruction for people who are digital illiterate. And that's a great thing that we can do in the library. Because remember one thing, and I always, if you took my LS540 class on reference services, you know this. We have to make sure that we give enough instruction to our patrons so they become independent users and managers of information. We don't want to have dependent patrons. We want them to become independent, that they can search for the information that will address their information needs. And so one of the things that we can do in the library is to teach people how to use the OPAC, how to use the computers, how to use the internet, how to use an email, how to open an email account, how to search for information, how to evaluate information sources too. This is very, very important. And the digital divide has to do with social economic status. It has to do with immigration or immigrants. It has to do with level of education right here. And of course, it has to do with age too. Many older adults don't know how to use computer. My mother, for example, I would like for her to use to have a computer and use the internet, but she doesn't want to learn. She says that it's too hard for her, and she's only 84 years old. But I think it would be great for her because she doesn't go out of the house much anymore, and it would be a great way to entertain herself. But she doesn't want to learn. So age becomes also part of the digital divide, and of course level of education. Okay, and we cannot have the same services for school-age children, young adults, or a undergrads, college students, grad students, or professors, because the level of education will tell you that you need special programs and special services geared to different levels of education, because they have different expectations. And I don't know if I told you that I go to my library, to my local library. Sometimes I check out movies, or I go with my kids, especially with my daughter. She likes to go to the public library and check out books in the children's collection. And I like to search also for resources for me. Well, sometimes I do find things, sometimes I don't. And I think because the services and the collections that they provide, it's not that I'm too educated, but are not of my interest. I have other interests. But when So level of education is another variable that we have to have. The same with my kids, my oldest son. He doesn't like to read what I like to read. By the way, he always tells me that I don't read anything fun because he likes to read fiction novels, science fiction novels, and I don't. I don't like to read science fiction novels. I mostly read journal articles. To me, they are fun to read. For let's say I'm reading articles on issues on diversity, or I'm getting ready for my social media class. I'm reading on social media, for example. And that has to do with the level of education. For him, that's a boring subject. For me, it's very interesting, and I love to read that. So, of course, a public library cannot have a collection of academic journals because that's not the point. That's why you have the academic library. However, depending on your population, where your library is located, you may have services geared to highly educated people or less educated people. And this variable, it interacts with the variable also age. It interacts with the variable social economic status and interacts with the digital divide variable. So we cannot see one variable, and I call these issues, I call them variables too, because I'm thinking about a research now, thinking about a research project, and these would be independent variables. Some would be independent, others would be dependent. But that's another class. That's a research class. But when we think about this variable, we can see that it will be very hard to isolate one variable from another. They are related. Age, immigration status, social economic status, ethnic background, level of education, social economic status, they are all related to one another. And this is very interesting. And this, by the way, and that's what I was saying about learning from you, I learned this once I read your scans. Before that, it wasn't something that I had thought about it. But after reading your scan, is that I realized this is all interrelated. We cannot see one thing without seeing the other thing. These are all variables that are related to one another. Political orientation. That's another one. And here I have in this PowerPoint, I have political orientation, sexual orientation, profession, and occupation. And finally, the digital divide también. And here I can see another relation, which is very interesting. I read in one of your papers that political orientation affects not only what we have in the library, what we offer in the library, but how the library is run too. And that it becomes a problem, in my opinion, because a public library should be an institution that is open for the whole community, and it cannot be run by certain political interests. And I read in one of the papers that in your town, in your community, it seems that this is what is happening. I think that's wrong. Public, in my opinion, means public. It means for all. But we have to take into consideration the political orientation of our community, okay? And have services and collections that interest our community. But we have also diversity of political opinions. So we may have to have a collection of different political orientation resources. And also, if we are offering, let's say we offer lectures on politics, that would be a great program to have in a public library. Well, we have to invite somebody from the Republican committee, or somebody from the Democratic committee, or somebody from an independent point of view. and have a series of lectures on politics, on local politics, or national politics, or international politics. That would be a great program for a local for a library, for a public library. So we have to take that into consideration too. We can even explore issues. For example, now we have the issue of Obamacare, of healthcare. Well, we can invite several speakers to have a series of lectures on health insurance, or on immigration issues, for example. I think that's part of what we have to do in the library. Remember what I have mentioned before, the library have to be the hub of the community. The library is not anymore what it was in the past, many years ago, a place where we keep the cultural heritage of our community. The library is that too today. It's also that today, but it's more than that. It has grown, and I think we have to be the cultural hub of the community. And we cannot be afraid to discuss issues that are in the front page. The same thing with sexual orientation, with professional and occupation too, and the digital I already talked about, but professional and occupation will mean that we have to have programs and collections geared to what our community, the professions that are out in our community. Of course, we cannot have everything, but in my case, for example, here in Clarion Library, Clarion town, this is a rural town. We have many farmers, we have hunters, we have people who work in the field, so we may have, or we should have, resources that are of interest for them. Statistical reports, things about farming, plants, animals, etc., etc. Because that's what we are a rural community. It will be different if you are a public library in a city. Then you have to have other materials and other services too, and other programs. Sexual orientation too. Now, of course, we have heterosexual and homosexual orientations, and why not having collections and services toward difference in sexual orientations. I don't see why not. Of course, when I see political orientation and sexual orientation, I think that they may be antagonistic sometimes. And this is what we as librarians, and if you got to be a director of the library, and I'm talking here about public libraries, not private or academic libraries, public libraries, you have to be careful in how to deal with the pressures of the political establishment in your town, and what you believe to be an ethical part of your profession. That is, and don't forget that, is to offer the best service to our patrons. And there may be some antagonistic interest in both. So this is something to think about too. That's why we have to have a written policy in the library in terms of what materials and what services we are providing for the community. Age, of course, it's another variable. And this is an independent variable. I would call it, in research terms, independent variable, because it affects the other variables, such as socioeconomic status. And that means that depending on your population, and every town, of course, and every city has children, teens, young adults, and older adults. So we have to provide the collections and the services for this diversity in age. Okay. This is very, very important. Another thing that I didn't think about before, but it is very important, and I think it's part of the diversity, is health issues. We have sign language. We have problems of accessing the library and accessing the materials. We have seeing or vision difficulties. We have hearing difficulties. We have mobility difficulties. So we have to provide access to information to every patron that we have in the community. If we have problems with mobility issues, why don't we take the library to the people, to the person who has mobility issues? If that person cannot move, go to the library. Well, let's let the library go to him or to her. You know, we can do a reference interview by phone and see what the person is expecting in terms of information resources, and take those resources to that person by mail or personally taking them to their houses. That would be great to have, and some libraries do. And of course, if we go and travel in our imagination now, we have in Latin America, we have, I haven't seen it here, but in many places we have the biblioburro. The biblioburro, okay? And that's a way to take resources, library resources, to small towns in mountains. So you take all your resources with a horse, or with a mule, or with an ass, and take all those resources to those towns. That's the biblioburro. Another important issue that I was surprised that I read in one of your papers is religious orientation and affiliation, and how once, and this is very interesting because this is a very, I think it's an ethical issue, and I don't know how to solve this. But in one of your papers, I read that let's call a minority have become a majority in that small community, and then wants to dictate how you're going to run the library in terms of hours of operation, in terms of the programs and services that you are offering, in terms of the collections, and even in terms of the catering that you're doing when you're having people at the library for a special event. Well, I think that's another problem, because it becomes like political affiliation, religious orientation, or religious affiliation may become antagonistic against the interests of the public library and against our and I repeat this because this have to be ingrained in our brains, that we have to offer the best service to all to every community member. Okay, so think about this carefully, and read that paper. I don't remember which one it was, but it is very, very interesting. Another issue becomes the international people, and these are not immigrants. These are people that they may be international tourists, international students, seasonal workers, and then you will find there are a lot of language barriers. And the information that they need, the type of information that they need, in many cases or in most cases, will be totally different than what you would have for immigrants, because immigrants are people who are to be established in that community for a long time or forever. But when you have international people, they do have different information needs, and if your community is one like that, for example, because your community is part of you are in a college town and in a university town, then you will have a lot of international students, for example, or international faculty or visiting faculty. So you may provide things that the university doesn't provide. You may think about having cultural nights and talking to the student groups to see if they can have those celebrations happening in your library, for example. And then you take that day, that special day, and then you put out present your resources, etc. That would be a great program or service to have in a library. Another thing that this is also new for me is isolation. Isolation when you have, and this would be the contrary of internationalism or international, and that means that your library is isolated. It's in a very, very tiny town. Of course, you may or may not have an internet connection, but the folk people are very local oriented. Well, why not then having guest speakers and talk about international affairs? Some of them may be interested to know what's going on in other places, or about tourism to other places. It would be great if you can prepare a series of presentations on Europe or Spain or Italy or France or England, and show music and show food, etc., etc., etc. Because again, remember that what the library has to be is the hub of the community. So the library can become the window for that community to the outside world. I think that would be great to do. Think about that too. Finally, this is my figure here, and as you see, we have all these issues or variables, and I think they all affect the library service collections and programs, but they affect each other too. But I didn't want to put any more arrows because it was kind of confusing. But we have economic status here. We have occupation and profession, and they are, of course, interacting. We have the digital divide, and that also interacts or is directly related to economic status, ethnicity too, and digital divide, isolation too, and this is what I was talking about, towns that are very isolated. Language and ethnicity may also be connected. International immigrant students and seasonal workers are connected to language. Political affiliation, sexual orientation, and religious orientation are also connected. And age, I think, is connected with everything, especially with health issues, education, hobbies, leisure time, ethnicity, not so much ethnicity, but the digital divide, for example, and economic status. So every little variable here is connected and affects how we manage the library, what services we provide at the library, and how we manage the collection. What I want you to is to think about this and see other relationships that I haven't thought about it. And please comment in the discussion board. Okay, thank you.